whale is the largest creature that has ever lived on the face of the planet. More than 7 meters long at birth, it grows up to 30 meters and weighs up to 125 metric tons at maturity. Over the centuries, it has fired the human imagination and become a legendary beast, the Leviathan. Despite its colossal size, the blue whale remains elusive. Its day-to-day behavior, mating rituals, migratory patterns, and geographic range are largely unknown. It does not reveal its secrets easily. It is rare, solitary, and nomadic, spending more than 90% of its life underwater. It surfaces briefly to breathe and then plunges back into its own mysterious world. Studying the blue whale and its natural environment is so complex that fewer than 10 scientists around the world are currently attempting it. For 20 years, one biologist has spent day after day out on the water in pursuit of these enigmatic mammals. Since founding an independent research center at Mingan on the north shore of the St. Lawrence River, Richard Sears has tracked blue whales annually in the Gulf. To learn more about them, he has traveled from the North Atlantic to the Antarctic to the Pacific. At the heart of his work is a simple question: where do blue whales go when they disappear from human view?
Yearning to learn about these animals will ever end. There's too much we don't know, and even if these animals happen to be land animals and we were able to see them that much more of the time, there will still be so much to learn. Blue whales that seem to be able to live to 80, 90 years of age, at least perhaps longer. There are so many other doors that open up on the question of diseases, question of the energetics of the animals, and so on. And what is clear to me is that you have to grab at little tidbits that you see on surface. When they come up to breathe, sometimes they'll stay as much as 2 or 3 minutes on the surface. But it really would be important if we could understand more about what these animals do down below, because that's where they spend most of their time.
To even begin to understand the blue whale, scientists had to learn how to identify individual animals. If they made 10 sightings in a day, were they observing 10 different whales, or the same whale surfacing at intervals? The answer was crucial but uncertain until 1980. That's when Richard Sears discovered that he could recognize specific whales by the pigmentation pattern of their skin.
The first blue whales that we looked at in 1979 and 1980, we were predominantly looking at the tails because we happened to come across some animals that were flukers. And we know now that only about 15 to 18% of the blue whales are flukers. And that's true whether it be in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. But we were intrigued by the fact that they had this very distinctive modeling on their sides, on their flanks. So we started taking pictures of this modeling, hoping that it would be a permanent marking and that would provide us with a means through which we could build a photo identification catalog. This whale is amazing. It's starting to look vaguely familiar. What is really fascinating is the more, by knowing individuals, you're able to learn about the overall group of blue whales that you're studying. And the more you know about these individuals, the more you're able to notice habits, tendencies, perhaps as simple as the way the animal comes to the surface to breathe, that perhaps that this animal is a fluker, such as trilobite, which is very, very regularly a fluker, even when boats are close at hand. And we've also noticed that this animal's picked up a little scar just in front of the tail, probably from a propeller or maybe a rope burn over time. And being able to see how these animals from year to year, when they arrive in the St. Lawrence, where they're sighted, and we know that trilobite, we've seen I believe, since at least 1985. Trilobite is really one of the more interesting names of the blue whales that we have in the St. Lawrence. Most of the time, we really try to give the names with regard to a very characteristic mark of the mottled pigmentation of the blue whales. But on Trilobite, on the underside of the tail, which, as I pointed out, we see almost every time the animal dives, there's a rather large excrescence, and that form looks just like a trilobite, so hence the name Trilobite.
The St. Lawrence River is a particularly rich ecosystem. Blue whales seem to come here primarily to feed on tiny crustaceans called krill. Richard Sears tries to follow their movements as they range over a broad area. Observers from the Gaspé Peninsula and the estuary of the St. Lawrence assist him in recording sightings. Some blue whales arrive in the Gulf in the spring, but it is not until May that many can be seen feeding off the Gaspé coast. They travel along the north shore of the St. Lawrence, reaching the estuary by the end of the summer. Still, their habits vary. Many individual whales do not return to the Gulf every year. That makes it difficult to estimate the overall population. Based on sightings that have been made, Sears believes there may be between 350 and 500 blue whales in eastern Canadian waters. Little is known about their reproduction rate, and even less about their mortality rate. At the turn of the century, whale hunting was a widespread activity in the North Atlantic. Before it was banned in 1966, nearly 11,000 blue whales had been slaughtered, mostly around Iceland, but also off the shores of the eastern Canadian Arctic and western Greenland. Today, the blue whale is an endangered species. In the North Atlantic, the population that was once estimated to be between 20 and 30,000 has been reduced to about 1,000 animals. The main obstacle for researchers has always been that once they spot a whale, it all too quickly dives out of sight. For 2 decades, biologist Jeff Goodyear has made repeated efforts to overcome this stumbling block and has experimented with systems for monitoring whale activities both underwater and on the surface. He has developed a multi-sensor radio tag which records a whale's speed, orientation, and dive depths, as well as oceanographic conditions.
I wish so much of this wasn't a perpetual experiment, you know. My early readings about whales involved mostly whaling. The data 20, 30 years ago came mostly from whaling, you know, how whales were killed and how much oil they produce and everything else. And there's this whole, you know, hundreds of years of this type of information with really nothing about what the animal is all about.
Jeff Goodyear has worked with Richard Sears for over 2 years trying to approach blue whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and place radio tags on them. If the researchers can carry out this extremely complicated maneuver, they will be able to gather vital data on the whale's behavior.
Almost at the outset of my interest in whales, I was interested in characterizing the three-dimensional world. These are three-dimensional animals. You know, as humans and terrestrial mammals, essentially, we're 2 dimensions. We can't even really imagine what these animals are going through.
Very good. Okay, so once this goes on, you know, once we'll place it on, the spring will keep that nice and snug on the whale like that. So. time's the tide to high?
Should be high, it'll be high right around 6.
Okay, so we're just about low, I guess, yeah.
There's another one out here. Diving now. Blue whale. Diving.
I think that these guys must just be traveling. I mean, they're not...
Yeah, they just hit little patches of food once in a while, and that's it. I mean, they're staying down long enough.
Yeah.
If they're traveling, we'd see them one, two, and then they really book.
Yeah.
They're not going that fast. Of course, the current's going out, so they might just be doing like right whales, go down and
taking a little lunch.
Open them out. Right in front. Whoa, okay. Hold on.
They're only getting these 1 or 2 surfaces.
No, he went down.
Working on these whales is really a question of one having to put up with what they are willing to give you. If on a certain day they're searching for food and they won't have nothing to do with anybody or any other boats or even any other whales in the area, it's very, very difficult to get near them. And it makes it very difficult if you want to put a radio tag on the animal or even just to photo ID the animal. Particularly so with radio tags because you have to be within a very close, intimate distance to the animal.
Eight hours of messing around for 3 seconds of almost glory there.
The same 2 whales or single animal a few days later or a week later might be very easy to approach because the animal may have found a source of food, perhaps feeding for several days, and is very comfortable. It doesn't have any stress about finding food. And all of a sudden the animal is easy to approach and you can get right alongside and just put a radio tag on it. But that's the reality of working on these whales, and particularly blue whales. My experience have been animals that seem to be a little bit more nervous than others at the approach of a boat. Certainly more wary than our humpbacks or finbacks.
Let's call the boat. Jesus Christ, I can't believe it.
Dan.
Each time the whale surfaced, we did get a reading.
Here, going out.
I see the tag. I saw
Mantis, or B166, has been sighted 3 times since 1990. Today she is traveling with a companion.
There she is! I know the other one. Hey! I think it's Scythe! B-17. I think that's who it is. I have to see the other side.
B-17, or Scythe, because of a mark on its flank, is an animal we've known for a long time, I believe since 1980 or 81. And Scythe is a male, and Scythe is an animal that will roam around, is often paired with many different females. Certain males seem to be much more present with the different females we've seen in the St. Lawrence than others.
And our latitude, longitude, 48 degrees, 40.986, and 68 degrees, 58.654. And the whale was probably about, I don't know, 1,000 meters. But right now we're up to almost 14 minutes, so we're looking at any time surfacing. And the recorded data on the tag, though, is being recorded regardless of surfacing. It's every 5 seconds. It's
so you would be able to see it if it was going along at 3 knots and then it accelerated up?
Yeah, I'll get the dive profile and we'll see if there's a transition in the profile where they might have, you know, tried to change depth or depth pattern to follow a krill patch or something. And at that point, if they start feeding, we may notice a combination of body turn
and
simultaneous with a speed change. So that will be really neat. Yeah.
Each time the whale surfaces, the radio tag emits a signal which allows the researchers to establish the animal's location. It also transmits all the data accumulated during the whale's preceding dive to a VHF radio receiver aboard the research boat. The information is then downloaded to a computer. The tag on Mantis should provide a detailed record of her behavior for up to 24 hours.
Time is 16:43. Whale up again.
It's really quite impressive. Most of the time, what you do see is the animal arriving at the surface, this big bag, which is the ventral pouch, undulating, and you see the ventral pleats expanded because the animal's been taking a mouthful, and it might be holding 50 to 70 tons equivalent of volume of water in there with krill, hopefully, for the animal. And it takes it about 30 seconds to a minute to evacuate the water out through the baleen plates, and then it will go down and feed again.
A lot of my focus has been on the diel behavior patterns of whales, which basically means the day and night behavior of these whales. They're very much tied into the prey, what the prey are doing, and most of the prey species do have some sort of vertical migrating component. In the case of the blue whales, it's been known for many years that they eat a very narrow range of prey, and in this case, euphausids or krill. To see that those vertically migrating euphausids or krill towards the surface in the evening and into the night, and then you see the whale's dive pattern change and follow that up to the surface. That's amazing, and that indeed is what we're finding.
There we go. That looks like it was a little more right side down. Nice power. What's always fascinating to me is how much power they must use. The minute they open their mouths, they're pushing against the whole ocean. You know, it's just, they break instantly. So imagine the power they have to use to get that water in that mouthful.
What's up? Tag's on. You can see that?
The radio tag is malfunctioning. Although it continues to emit a signal when Mantis surfaces, it has stopped transmitting the data from her dives to the onboard radio receiver. However, the tag has an internal system to store the data, so it is imperative that the scientists get it back. It's designed so that it will eventually release from the whale and drop into the water. the researchers are ready to track the whale all night if need be in order to find and retrieve the precious tag.
Ok, ça c'est l'animal qui est plutôt vers les 8 heures.
To be the first plot of this blue whale. There we go. Cool. So
Come back up and he's doing something in here. And then
that's probably where he's actually feeding.
yeah, that's where he seems to have found the
Yeah,
food, because then he
that's
shortens
right.
up, and in here he
Sure.
was doing something, and maybe it wasn't quite enough, and he made a couple spikes.
That's right,
And then he
yeah.
found something, a little bit here.
The speed sensor gives us some really interesting information that we may want to look at how fast the whale dives down and makes a transition. When the whale is actually diving down, it's probably not in prey yet. It hasn't found the prey yet. It's just going down to get to a particular level where it may remember that it's found prey in the past. Then it levels out and starts going along, and so we would be able to see that speed change at depth and turn on its side, lunge through a concentration of krill. So another level of inference that these animals might be feeding. And this is the first time. I mean, this is the first evidence for this on blue whales.
Blue whales typically are seen basically singly or in pairs. It doesn't mean you don't see 3 animals together, or 4 sometimes, or even groupings of tens of blue whales in a certain area. But when they're swimming close together and within a body length, most often they'll be in pairs and not in groups bigger than that. So, and because of watching how the rear animal and the pair seem to react when a third animal, even a finback, approached the pair, I started to wonder if in fact the rear animal was not a male, and perhaps the front animal was a female. And the thing that's frustrating is we couldn't really clearly tell from seeing them phenotypically at the surface. And so when the genetics came along, when the biopsy technique came along, right away we were able to get the gender information.
Nice work, very nice work. Stop.
What we found is that 90% of the pairs for which we have information on biopsied animals, the pairs are in fact made up of female and males. And 90% of the time, the female is in the lead and the male is in the rear. Now, we don't know what all this means, but we feel it has something to do with understanding more about how they reproduce. And it may be simply a fact that if a male can spend as much time as possible near a female, he may be there at the right moment when she is receptive to a mating, and that male would pass on his genes.
The samples are sent to Pair Paspel, a specialist in the genetic analysis of cetaceans.
Once you have a biopsy, it's like having the perfect picture. I mean, you can do hundreds of thousands of analyses because of this PCR, this DNA technology in one biopsy. That means that you can keep redoing experiments until you have the perfect picture. And you know when you got a sample, you got a sample. It's not like you go back and you develop a film and then, oh, the light wasn't right, the angle was a little off. It's perfect. You can look at it, oh, see, this one is actually the daughter of this male and this female, and this male was actually also the father of this other whale over here. And suddenly you can see if some males have more reproductive success than others, and you get a very detailed insight in the breeding system. If we compare our data with people that collect data all over the world, we have the same level of variation. And it's strange for a population that has been diminished quite a lot from its original level. So they're not what you call beyond salvation. They're not so depleted that there's no genetic variation, there's nothing to sort of expand on. It's all there.
Possibly the main thing for me is that after so many years of working in the St. Lawrence and seeing that 75% of the animals we had in our catalog were not regularly sighted animals, I, obviously asked myself the question, well, where do they go? Are they just out of our reach in the St. Lawrence? Are they out off of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland? One of the animals we actually see regularly in the St. Lawrence had been resighted 2 summers in a row off of Greenland. So we had very brief glimpses of movement. And we knew that these animals seemed to move quite a bit. So for me, it had become more and more important to try and get to places like Iceland. And I'd been wanting to do that for a long time.
As blue whales feed at the surface under the midnight sun, Richard Sears keeps within close range aboard an Icelandic research boat. With the help of scientists here, he hopes to answer 2 essential questions. Is there a link between the blue whale population in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and in Iceland? Is it in fact the same population that migrates between the 2 places? Sears and his colleagues are taking photographs and biopsies for clues.
Biopsy in Iceland, guy.
Good guy.
We have an estimate from the 1987 survey, and that was very low, around 500 animals, I think. But then we have had a new survey in 95. We haven't calculated it for the blue whales, but we've got considerably higher number of sightings.
And to be able to go there and photograph around 30 different blue whales, what I was interested in finding out was if we got that kind of sample size, would we recognize 5, 10, 15 animals? We didn't. We didn't know one of them. I thought that if we'd at least seen 5 that we knew, that there's a good chance that these populations, or it was the same population of blue whales that sometimes chose to come in the St. Lawrence and other times mostly perhaps spent time off of Iceland. But they seemed to be different or discrete from one another.
For Richard Sears and his colleagues, this is critical new information. The existence of 2 separate groups may indicate a greater number of blue whales in the North Atlantic than previously believed.
Why doesn't the other guy come up? I definitely don't know him from the St. Lawrence.
Even though we don't have any genetic analysis yet, which we will have, we do have is toxic analysis of the blubber from Iceland as well as from the St. Lawrence. And there is a very clear difference in the levels of toxins that the animals from Iceland have, which are much lower. So it shows is what you would have hoped for, is that the blue whales found off of Iceland are not nearly as polluted, if at all, compared to the ones that we find in the St. Lawrence. So it further helps by comparison to indicate that the animals in the St. Lawrence might have a problem due to PCP loads. When we're looking at the question of whether there's a link between the contaminants and reproductive success of blue whales in the St. Lawrence, it would be something that warrants looking into, because if you think that over 20 years we've only seen 9 calves, and with the little effort that we were able to put in off of Iceland, and that 10% of the animals that we photographed there were calves, and knowing that PCBs can be a problem, will affect reproduction, I think it's something that very clearly needs to be looked into. As we got to know the animals during the summer months, we wanted more and more to find out about their lives the rest of the year. And there was no place in the North Atlantic where we had access to blue whales in the winter months.
Richard Sears has not yet found the wintering grounds of the North Atlantic blue whales. But in the Sea of Cortez, he can study their Pacific counterparts in the waters where they spend the winter. It is here that the greatest concentration of female blue whales with their calves are found.
The Gulf of California is known as one of the most productive areas in the world. It's the only nursing, or even we could say it's the only wintering ground for the North Pacific blue whale known.
Marine scientist Diane Gendron assisted Richard Sears in research in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and in the Sea of Cortez for several years. Now she directs her own research program on blue whales in Mexican waters.
It's a methodology, very easy, very fast. You take picture at the same time. You wait until the whale come back. You go and check the skin, looking at the footprint.
Yes, sir.
All of them lose skin. Some of them not all the time, but the percentage so far is about 99%. So using the skin, we can determine the sex of each individual. Also, we try to sample more frequently the feces, which we use to analyze the species of euphausiids or groups that they feed on.
Quel beau métier que le nôtre.
Female blue whales have a gestation period of 11 months and then nurse their offspring for 7 months. They produce milk that is rich in fats, so their calves grow at a phenomenal rate. In a single day, a calf drinks up to 200 liters of milk and gains up to 90 kilograms. Lactating females expend enormous energy. the Sea of Cortez offers them the abundant food sources they need. Researchers have discovered that blue whale mothers can feast on krill and suckle their young at the same time.
The total catalog for Northeast Pacific animals is anywhere between 600 and 800 animals. And what's been interesting and what we would find, which was logical, is that the animals from here, from the Sea of Cortez, would be the same animals that you see off the coast of California, and that has proven to be the case. And we have about 80 or 90 matches between this area and the waters off of San Francisco.
The area may be used more by female and female with calf than male, for example, or juvenile. So we have to be careful about these data, but they're showing a high percentage of mothering calves. It's about 11-12%, which is high.
Some of the other things that have been interesting, the Japanese had suggested that the calving interval for blue whales was around 2 years. In other words, a blue whale gives birth every 2 years. And this we confirmed here in the Sea of Cortez. An animal that we spotted in 1988, which had been a whale we'd seen earlier, but with a calf in 1988, was resighted in 1990, again with a calf. And that was the first time anybody had ever had a really clear calving interval in blue whales that had been photo-identified. There. Some speed. That's a cow calf, all right. We had been talking so much about the lack of calves, and there we were in the St. Lawrence estuary off of Rivière-Portneuf, and there's a female we had known for about 4 or 5 years, and along she comes with a calf. It was the only calf that we saw this year, but it was interesting. We were able to get some good looks at it, and what was very valuable is that we were able to get biopsies of both the mother and the calf. Okay, we got that side pretty well. I'm up to frame 26 inclusive. Whereas in the St. Lawrence, out of 350 that we've gotten cataloged, we've only had 9 calves over a 20-year period. So yeah, there's something interesting and sort of worrisome about that. Maybe it's simply that the females, for the most part, don't choose to come in the St. Lawrence with their calves, but yet some of them do. And we know that we have a roughly 50-50 sex ratio between male and female. Is it because, quite simply, females are not interested in coming to St. Lawrence because it's a noisy place with a lot of ship traffic? Maybe it's simply that. What makes it interesting is that each year, when you gather that much more information about these animals, and especially when you get to learn about the individuals, it adds to the portrait that you're trying to create.
first time I listened to blue whales was up off of Newfoundland. It was in Argentia. And I brought with me a little box that would shift the frequency up. And I plugged it in, I'm listening, and I thought, it's broken, something's wrong, the equipment's wrong. Because all I heard was this noise, this hum, this and what I realized after about a half an hour of fiddle around was that I was listening to a chorus of blue whales off the shelf, off the Newfoundland shelf.
In the early 1990s, bioacoustics researcher Chris Clark was given access to a top-secret ocean network of hydrophones which had been designed for the U.S. Navy to monitor Soviet submarines. This wide-ranging acoustic surveillance system gave Clark an unprecedented opportunity. He was able to analyze the recordings of the sounds of blue whales.
We've roughly got here about close to half an hour's worth of a recording that the Navy has acquired over their hydrophone arrays. And if you notice, the frequency over here, that's 15 hertz and that's 20 hertz. So these are all infrasonic, totally infrasonic, and you can't hear it. So if I play this at normal speed, you'll just hear, you don't hear much of anything. But if I speed it up, say to 60 times, a blue whale sound compared to a humpback sound is sort of the difference between a mantra and a jazz musician or a vocalist. Humpbacks are constantly improvising. Blue whale, it's very monotonous. There are two things about that sound that are intriguing, in that one, it's low-pitched, so it immediately takes advantage of long-range transmission. And the monotony, the redundancy, is exactly what you do if you're trying to reach an audience at great range. Humpback's song is primarily within 10 miles, whereas a blue whale song, you're talking about hundreds of miles. And another thing that when I think of, if you think of sailing or if you think of navigating, what is one of the things you want to have when you're navigating is a chronometer. And these guys have a chronometer and a half. I mean, they can sit there and just, finbacks the same way, but blue whales will miss a beat. They can miss a couple of these notes and they will come back in right on the beat minutes later. One of the early sort of challenges that I threw out to these acoustic oceanographers and acoustic physical acousticians in the Navy was, well, instead of thinking of this ocean as being man's world where we go around doing, you know, our things, what if you put a blue whale in there? What if you put a blue whale in your model? So we did. They put a blue whale sound in there, and they said, okay, here's a blue whale. What happens if it makes a sound? And you actually see the sound spread out. And it eventually reaches the continental shelf 600 miles away and bounces off the continental shelf. It reaches all the islands, the mid-Atlantic ridge, and it forms an image. So by doing these runs, which are simply very long-term sort of acoustic echoes, you form an image of the ocean. So it immediately brings to mind, this is what a blue whale, it has an acoustic memory, and one of the things that it would want in its acoustic memory are all the major features of the ocean. And it should be able to hear these features when it approaches them from different directions and over again over its lifetime.
So really, with this, what you're saying is that you know where these animals are in winter. I mean, you know that finbacks are off of Iceland and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and whatever, and blue whales are there, but they also can be out by mid-Atlantic ridge. And
right, and that's what this gives you the large perspective.
The answer to Richard Sears' questions about the migration habits of blue whales may come soon, and it may be surprising. Chris Clark's acoustic research seems to indicate that they treat the North Atlantic as one vast territory and move freely about it. It's almost as if blue whales enjoy being unpredictable and tripping up the scientists who study them. In 1996, some were photographed in the St. Lawrence for the first time during the winter. Maybe there is no migratory pattern for North Atlantic blue whales as there is for other whale species. And maybe there are no predetermined breeding grounds. If that is the case, researchers will be confronted with yet another mystery: where and when individual blue whales migrate and reproduce.
You know, one of the things that we all think wholesale is that there are these massive migrations of these whales, and we're finding out more and more that this is not the case. It's not just the fact that ice forms in December or January, blocks the Gulf, and all the animals leave. There's no reason for some of these animals that don't have to migrate anywhere to breed, for instance, to leave. They have food there, why leave? It was fascinating to see that these whales can handle being in ice. I mean, we sort of felt it was possible, but we didn't have, it's one of these things that you have to see it sort of believe it. And then in this case, it was very, very clear. These animals are not bothered by this level of ice anyway. Now, what's interesting, there's a risk. I mean, how long would these animals stay there? Maybe they stayed there a good part of the winter, but it also depends a lot on how the ice formed. And you presume that these animals have a way of detecting thickness in ice or ice cover.
Scientists have to put together all these new pieces of information about the natural history of the blue whale, and then they have to continue to search for missing pieces in order to complete the puzzle. By combining the results of studies in different fields, such as photo identification, genetics, and acoustics, they will be able to arrive at a better understanding of the life of these animals and the factors that are crucial to their survival.
Perhaps what drives some other scientists crazy is that biology, it's really sort of an endless thing. You find out things, but there's always something else that comes along. There are more questions, and I think that it takes several generations of biologists to really understand what we need to understand about the ecology of the blue whales before we really know what's going on. We're getting there. I mean, we know a lot more now than we did certainly 20 years ago, but it's still so hidden beneath the surface.
With each discovery, with each technological advance, they have to rethink their ideas about the blue whale. And perhaps this is what drives Richard Sears and his colleagues. The more they learn, the more mysterious the blue whale appears, and the greater their fascination with these giants of the sea.